Is it right to say, as the Home Secretary is doing, that repeat demonstrations for Gaza, Palestine, or indeed anything else, peace, will now be curtailed and the police are being given new powers to stop repeat protests? We take a look at that. We look also at the prospects for peace in Israel-Palestine. And at the recent party conferences, there have been the Conservatives pretty much ringing empty halls is the huge impression you get from the tiny numbers who bothered to turn up. And actually the Greens conference in England, which really had quite a zingy kind of speech from the Jewish leader, Zak Polanski, who nonetheless upholds the right to protest for Palestine. So all of that and looking ahead to the SNP conference. Those are the headlines. Here's the podcast.
Well, hi folks, and welcome to this week's Leslie Riddick podcast. Leslie, the nights are fair drawing in with Storm Amy over the weekend. Certainly the autumn now. As we speak, hopefully you can't hear the drum of the washing machine in the background because I'm washing the second part of the big duvet. And I had a mad notion for a hot chocolate last night, my first hot chocolate of the season. So I was bashing around at 9:45 thinking there must be drinking chocolate in here somewhere. How are things with you?
Well, it just shows you when, kind of country lubbers have different things in their minds, because I'm thinking leaves for compost. Everywhere I'm going, I cycled over to Dundee yesterday and I'm sort of looking at all the verges and thinking, there's some good beech leaves. Note to self, come and get them later.
Leaf mold.
To chuck it, well, you could, but to chuck in with the grass cuttings to sort of, So, I mean, honestly, of such things, I've also had a wee speed bump put in front of my drive bit so that hopefully, I mean, none of the torrents of water have washed mud onto the front of the house now, which is a total result, because I couldn't get back in one time. And when I was going over to Dundee, I was going over to get shockwave therapy, because since I came back from the wee holiday in Cornwall, I just wore a new pair of shoes that were basically not a good idea for the first time, then ended up driving back to the airport in one of those, it was unbelievable traffic, even especially at the weekend, come to think of it. And it was one of those ones, when you're inching through traffic and your right heel is down, inching forward. Anyway, the next day I was in agony and I've been hopping around basically ever since, including in Finland, which was a bit of a livener. So someone suggested this shockwave therapy. So eventually I thought, well, I better just go and do it. So I cycled over yesterday and they did it. Quite a livener.
Do you get a leather strap for between your teeth?
No, it's
stick
funny
to bite down on.
She didn't actually even say, this might be painful. And it just struck me that she's probably just taken it as read that anybody that gets as far as her is just, it's going to be painful.
Yeah, anything
you know
would
what I
be
mean?
good. Yeah.
Yeah, and also you don't care. You're at the stage where you're vaguely debating either crutches for the rest of your life or just someone cutting your leg off. So, but it definitely seems to have helped. Although I've also got the wee spiky ball thing, which I'm rolling backwards and forwards on the aforementioned troubled heel as we speak.
Well, as long as that's not causing any background noise, we'll be absolutely fine. Where to start? I think we've the Trump peace plan is still rolling along, and there's a couple of clips recently of him stressing how well things were going, and very interesting stress on the people of Israel. He said that twice or three times. The people really want it to happen, which sounded a bit of a contrast to Netanyahu really wants it to happen. On Hamas, it says, all I can say is they've been really, really fine. So, there are things afoot there, and they're moving to the second stage of negotiation, I think, in Egypt. What's your take on these?
Well, I guess you're only listening to people who are more expert than yourself in all of this, I guess. But the obvious thing is still the Palestinians aren't involved, just as in Ukraine, the Ukrainians weren't involved. And it kind of, in the end, particularly with the Palestinian situation, surely that is going to come round to whack you in the face. These kind of contrived, imposed mediations just leave that level of compulsion that leaves the door open for anger and resentment and so on to flourish when it has the chance to do it. And of course, everyone at the moment is just thinking, glory be. I mean, I watched, enough interviews with people to say, look, I mean, if Donald Trump wants to get the Nobel Prize for this, just give him the blooming prize. And it's weird to have to watch grown men and women interviewers having to ask other grown men and women, do you think Donald Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize for this? Because it's like they all smile like, oh yeah, that child again. Yeah, do we have to just give him another little gong to kind of keep him? But the terrible truth is that might well keep him connected to this process, because it's one thing to get a release of hostages and a ceasefire, although I'm not suggesting that's a doddle, but that first stage looks like that's the bit that could well happen. But then you've got this interim transition, a new administration, Hamas having to kind of basically surrender, and no real destination in terms of Palestinian self-determination not happening. So if you heard, I mean, Ehud Olmert, who was a previous Israeli prime minister, and my God, when you listen to that guy, you just think, would that he were back in. He raised this and said, I'm still holding out for a Palestinian state from the Israeli point of view, because we're never going to get peace. You can get a ceasefire, but the point of getting peace, which might well be a kind of a hopeful thought, even if there was a separate Palestinian state. But he was using words like the Palestinians need sovereignty. And that's, for an Israeli, when you've got the stage that we're at the moment, where you've just got the utterly hardline Netanyahu, who, by the way, Olmert predicts will be out on his ear and disowned completely by the time any of this comes to pass and there's an election. He's out. You fear what would come next. He's created a huge polarization in Israel, but he could soon be as vilified, and actually the corruption charges against him resurrected. All of that could start to kick in kind of soon. But still, I mean, obviously, if aid could get in, but when you see the pictures of Gaza, I mean, it breaks your heart, because where would you even start on reconstruction of that? And yet, if people have decided that they're going to stay there come hell or high water, and both, it's kind of everyone's responsibility to make sure that happens.
Yes, and we had the Scottish flotilla peace protesters back after having been detained in Israeli prison and having suffered some really horrific beatings. The Glasgow woman had her medication taken off of her. I think she had a door slammed in a broken leg. Just appalling testimony from all sorts of different people that have been part of that international aid flotilla, trying to make the point about the lack of food and medical aid going into Gaza.
And actually, there's a bigger point about this, if that isn't sort of big enough, is that this flotilla has got almost no coverage here. And in fact, the coverage of the whole thing to do with Gaza, and I know we're going to come on to talk about the marches and the unbelievable crackdown by the new Home Secretary on our basic rights to demonstrate. But, the rest of the world is alive with this, and we're just not getting a sense of that coverage. That flotilla had people from 479 people, I think, from almost every other country in the world. And as you say, three Scots, who were completely overlooked in most coverage, except, of course, the National. And I mean, they were kidnapped. There is an offence in international law, and even saying those words makes you sound like such a namby-pamby these days. Really, that to even make the point that there are rules and laws about how people are treated makes you sound like something from sort of Pollyanna land. But I mean, the stuff that was happening, that there was, in addition to what you were mentioning there, there was an Italian guy, journalist, and he was reporting. He said, I had blows to my back, blows to my head. The Israeli soldiers laughed at all of it. anyone who failed to keep their eyes down was punished with a hit to the head. Now, you might think, in comparison to 70 people being killed in Gaza last week on the Thursday of the terrible synagogue attack, that is, that will make seem relatively small. But these people were just, journalists, activists, lawyers who were trying to protest against a maritime blockade of Gaza that has lasted for 16 years, that you can't actually even land in Gaza. That's out the window. And people were reporting, okay, sleep deprivation, not having their medication, beatings, automatic rifles being pointed at your head. Now, of course, if it didn't go off, you might think, well, so what? Wait till that is something that you're experiencing while you see contempt all around you. Dogs set on people, being made to watch footage of the Hamas attacks 2 years ago this very day. It was a kind of real ordeal, which, again, just there's been almost no coverage of here, despite the fact that a friend of mine was in Italy a couple of weeks ago and was visiting Bologna, and Bologna was on complete strike. Everything shut down, the buses, the trains, everything shut down, because the unions called a strike on behalf of Gaza. And across the world, people have made huge sort of protests. At the weekend on Saturday, Amsterdam had a protest, and 30% of the population of Amsterdam turned out. So we're getting a focus here on, obviously the synagogue attack was totally horrible and
shocking,
appalling. And it's like, and of course, the Hamas attack 2 years ago, the same. And yet you can't get to a stage where there's a sort of trade-off of hurts like this. I mean, the folk Defend Our Juries who are organising the demonstrations and have no intention of backing down on this at all, keep putting out statements which include really forceful quotes from Jewish protesters who are saying that, the call to scrap the vigil because of the attack on the Jewish community in Manchester. One woman saying this is wrongly conflating the actions of the Israeli state with all Jews. Jewish people around the world are not responsible for Israel's crimes, and many don't support the Israeli state. If we cancelled the vigil, we would have perpetuated the dangerous narrative of equating the two, which fuels anti-Semitism, which is a really strong point. And I don't know if I heard that once in all the coverage there's been, especially on the BBC, which I was saying to you earlier, I made the mistake of watching weekend BBC News at about 10 o'clock on Sunday night, just had to switch off because it was so incredibly loaded. But that's where we are.
I thought Mick Napier was on yesterday with Call K. I just caught a little bit of it after school drop-off. And again, he was being sort of badgered and interrupted, and I've a lot of kind of very loaded comments put to him, which I thought he dealt with excellently. We get crap BBC radio coverage sometimes round about locally in the car, and bizarrely Times radio comes through walloping nobody's business, giving you all sorts of peculiar views that you might not agree with. But Grant Shapps was on, and his father-in-law had actually been in Manchester, and he was one of the main guys that blocked the door to prevent this terrorist attacker from getting in and killing more people. But he too went on to contrast against the kind of alarmist views that Jewish people were not safe in the UK, and he says, "Look, this is just clearly untrue." And one of the countries in the world, in comparison to America or Canada or Australia or elsewhere, where there's extremely good community relations, and he said, the Manchester Mosque has excellent, the Manchester Synagogue rather has excellent links with the churches and the local mosques and the community groups, and he said we're lucky to live in such a tolerant society. And they went on to describe his revulsion at other members of the Israeli government, particularly the Minister for the Diaspora and Anti-Semitism, who'd invited Tommy Robinson over to a visit to Israel, describing how he was proud to host a true British patriot. So, this is a much more complicated and nuanced picture than the BBC is currently putting across.
It totally is. And I mean, the only, well, one moment actually occurred last week with the Greens conference in England with the new leader, Zak Polanski, who's Jewish. Now, that kind of, in a way, helps what he's then going on to say, because he, pretty much made the same line of all of this, just saying he was not going to end up having to sort of choose essentially between his Jewish identity and his support for the people of Gaza. And he made this point again that 53 Palestinian people, sorry, I got the number wrong earlier, 53 Palestinians were killed the same day. And he said, when I was brought up learning about the Holocaust and we said never again, I believed it meant never again for anyone. So that, I think, I don't know if you saw any of the coverage of Zak Polanski, but he fairly, he was romping up onto the stage. And actually, apparently there were more than 1,000 delegates attending in Bournemouth, and there were queues stretching into the far distance. The Greens have had a membership surge to 80,000 sign-ups. Now, we're going to contrast that a wee bit with the Conservative conference in a minute, where I think they very possibly had more people attending than, the Tories. But still...
Well, I think they unquestionably had more people attending than the Tories. The Tories have been very lacklustre. And again, my stint listening to Times Radio, they were actually kind of making a joke of the fact that they hadn't yet gone up to the Tory party conference. I think so. That was Monday when it was started, and they hadn't quite got around to going yet. And they said, well, if nobody else can be bothered, why should we? And that's, kind of Tory radio has very much shifted over to reform. But yeah, it was not exactly a stowed out affair.
But I mean, you just sort of stick with the Greens, though, because I mean, there's finally somebody, a leader in England, who's saying some of the sort of, strong stuff that needs to be said about poverty, about inequality. It's like that, oh yeah, that old stuff that slipped off the edge, which actually is sitting at the back of all of the rest of this. It seems like that's too hard to deal with. So we just end up, well, some parts of the country and some people just end up scapegoating onto the most recent arrivals instead. And as long as that dynamic continues, which it certainly will under the millionaire reform leader Nigel Farage, who, skipped a lot of his wealth to Ireland after Brexit and all the rest of it. But anyway, that is important, that somebody's going back to the beginning of this argument. So his speech that was talking about, a dystopian Britain, 99% contrasted with the 1%. And, he said, we need to make sure every person in this country knows there are people who go to sleep and without lifting a finger, wake up richer, much richer. And so, he got a big response to that. But so would anybody in Scotland who started to use some of this language. And he also put the Greens, unafraid to say migration has made this country. And so he's contrasting with Labour, who are drifting off, and attacked, the crackdown on rights by proscribing Palestine action. Also revoking campaigner passes at Labour conference. I did notice that seemed to be related to one guy coming on, Matthew Torbett, who had his pass revoked. It looks like that was very related to him coming on Radio Scotland, actually, the day before, and saying that after May there would be a Joe Biden moment where basically Starmer would be asked to go. Then lo and behold, the next day, bang. So somebody's listening to Radio Scotland, Fraser. But, all of that, and introducing digital ID, he's saying the alarm bells of authoritarianism are ringing loud and clear. So just to say, that was quite a sort of entry. And it makes you wonder as well. I mean, it's everything in their slogan is bold politics. So what are the Scottish Greens going to be doing about the bold politics? Because there's a report that they're going to come up with a policy on independence that will sort of outflank the SNP. I haven't seen any detail of that. Have you?
No, not as yet. And I'm assuming they're keeping that under wraps for closer to their own conference. But I'm certainly very interested to see it. Just before we go on to that, I think we should scooch back quickly just to talk about Shabana Mahmood's plan to crack down on protest and expand police powers under the Public Order Act to address what she calls repeated disorder from protesters, so that police could consider the cumulative impact of multiple demonstrations when imposing conditions on marches or organised protests. Coming after nearly 500 people were arrested at a pro-Palestine Action demonstration in London on October the 4th. You think, well, if you hadn't prescribed Palestine Action in such a political fashion and politicised the policing of protest, maybe we wouldn't be in these position in the first place in terms of the mass arrests. They tend to be extremely peaceful protests, and compare that to some of the far-right action that was going on in London recently. And of course, the whole point of protest and repeated protest is to change the minds of government and to demonstrate the will of the people. And you don't do that kind of one wet Wednesday and hope they notice. It's the whole point of it is it's repeated and it builds up. And as you said, if you contrast that to places like Italy, where there's been a national strike, these are important rights that people have to freedom of assembly and freedom to, express their views in these big political moments.
Well, and it is essentially becoming a standoff, but it's a standoff in a sense with a population that entirely supports the rights of Palestinians to have a state, and anyone to take action to make the killing of them on a daily basis stop. And a government that's just turning a total blind eye. I mean, anyone watching Channel 4 would have seen that actually, after all the stuff about stopping arms exports to Israel, July was the biggest ever month, followed then, second biggest month, September. So, here we are trying to have the majority of people trying to make some impact on the political will of a government, which did lose, was it 5 of its seats to, Palestinian candidates at the last election, but then that all got, swept into a corner as well, thanks to the large majority otherwise. So you're left, it's like the situation with Iraq, when you've got 250,000 people on the streets in Scotland and it still meant nothing. And indeed, independence, 250,000 people back in the day, it still meant nothing. So you could say, well, what difference does it make? But these guys are absolutely determined. Every time the state is upping the ante of the consequences, they're kind of saying, you've got to realise then how deeply we believe in this, because we're not stupid. And we know that people will be arrested very probably in London, because that's the sort of flashpoint of the whole thing. And people will have seen very possibly that last weekend, there was lots of elderly people with disabilities. There was a blind guy arrested with a kind of mobility cane. And he was being, taken very gently by the arm by a police who was nonetheless arresting him. It's crazy because the Metropolitan Police are saying, the Police Federation chair has been on the record saying, enough is enough. We're emotionally and physically exhausted. The Met operation has required not only 70% of their own public order capacity, but 400 officers from forces as far as Northern Ireland. So that's building up their case that we just cannot be spending this amount of our time and effort and money on you guys just protesting utterly peacefully, you'd have to say. On the other side, it's upping the ante of where are your priorities? I mean, the guy, one of the amnesty guys was saying, we're in Northern Ireland, he was saying that we're repeatedly advised that the police force there has insufficient officers. Yet here they are in London helping the Met to arrest pensioners holding cardboard signs.
Yeah. It reminds me particularly of Iraq and the Serious and Organised Crime Act. There's a great Mark Thomas comedy skit about how he kind of brought down the rules that were brought in to prevent protest around Parliament. You had to make a written application for permission to protest. You had to get a permit. So he started a group that did mass loan demonstrations. So everybody would trip into this one police station to make an application for a permit in person. And I think he ended up in the Guinness Book of Records as a record holder for doing something like 20 odd protests in 20 different locations requiring 20 different permits, all in the space of 24 hours or something within London. And he had his mate with a wheelie bin. It was his placard caddy. So that they could open your Parliament Square, you need a Bugger Blair placard. Go, here you are, sir, and hand him the right placard for the right time. I need to try and find the clip of that. I think it's about half an hour long, but it's well worth listening to the whole thing. And I can't remember, but I think
you need to find that.
Yeah,
stick it on the notes. That sounds a good one.
Gordon Brown did a speech at the Nelson Mandela statue. Which actually contravened the way that it had been so broadly defined what protest was, and at that point it just kind of got scrapped and forgotten about. But again, it aped some of the stuff that the Tories were trying to do about noisy protest and disruptive protest. Protest is noisy and disruptive.
Yeah, and actually, it's still. I mean, we've talked about this, remember, before with Pat, but there's a sort of disdain from all the political parties, including the SNP, about street protest, and a lot of it is a class point, although it isn't totally on this example. But, it's as if the kind of, the great and the good, the proper way to do anything political is, the channeling of stuff, the infinite tedium of trying to influence people who are already on side for some reason or another, with elections that happen only every 4 or 5 years, with a broken electoral system that means the same guys will get elected and yada, yada, yada. And the idea that you would do something spontaneous like take to the streets, Jesus, that's just sort of knocks everybody off kilter, And yet, actually, the Defend Our Juries lot are citing in their press releases the example of Edinburgh, funnily enough, where they're saying that other police forces, not the Met, are basically deciding not to arrest protesters who are holding the same sign as the guys did in Trafalgar Square. Now, of course, there have been arrests in Edinburgh sometimes after the event. Indeed, somebody was arrested at the event I spoke at. And I thought, okay, right. Maybe that's not over. But, nowhere near the same degree. They've also cited Derry in Northern Ireland, Totnes, Kendal, where police have chosen not to arrest peaceful protesters. And Truro, where apparently the force sent 2 police liaison officers who later described the demo as lovely and peaceful.
Careful now.
I know that's their chores right there, but the thing is, this what's happening, it seems to me, and this happens so often in this country, is that a political argument, which is our position about the rights of the people of Palestine, is being turned into a legal argument about your legal right to protest, the legal status of Palestine action. And so there's a sort of twist in the dialectic, where people are straightforwardly trying to say, I cannot bear watching any more dead children and people in Gaza. No. That's what they're trying to say. And instead, the energy is getting turned into a sort of legal challenge to a government that will not listen to this. But I hope people will not forget that. And actually, John Swinney got, because David Lammy got total pelters, which again got massive coverage when he was standing at a rally to pay tribute to the synagogue attack victims. And some people were there who shouted, you should go to Palestine, and, basically said, you've egged them on, which, of course, many other people would feel David Lammy has been very slow to, in fact, some of the stuff he said, at the beginning of all of this was just shameful. So nonetheless, John Swinney found himself in a bit of a similar situation because he was heckled at an event outside the Scottish Parliament, I think on Sunday, was it, or what?
Yeah, various people shouted shame on you because he, during his
called
speech,
for the recognition of Palestine.
He said it was the right thing to do. And people who'd gathered were very annoyed by what they saw as a conflating of the politic and the remembrance. So
I would still come back to that. I mean, that was an incredible interview with Ehud Olmert, on Channel 4, because he's very clear-eyed about this and just thinks, as indeed John Swinney had basically said, that recognition of Palestine is part of a path to peace. And it's not just like it's a ceasefire, then we all go home. Peace is, God, that is going to be some long, long path that needs everybody to stay involved. But you need to be able to say these things. So it's nonetheless a few people in a crowd that have got wind of something up and decide to go, and they're free to do that. Nobody's calling for them to not be able to say something. Nonetheless, that is one view, and doubtless there will be many people on the streets in the weekends to come. And I think, I haven't got it right in front of me here, but Defend Our Juries, which are, I keep wondering why they've got that name actually, but anyway, they are really going to be ramping up their actions in the lead up to the Palestine action appeal against it that's going to be heard in court at some point in November.
Yes, and of course the government has been given right to appeal the fact that they can take this challenge. So it's a kind of multi-layered thing. That was just when you were saying there will be other views. Kay kept coming battering on to poor Mick Napier that there'd be other views that Israel wasn't committing a genocide in Gaza, and was very sort of strident about that. And then there was a wee gap while somebody else spoke, and then obviously somebody had tapped the glass at the other side and handed her a statement from the official BBC statement, which was to recognise the UN report, and she had to sort of meekly read that out. It was a bit of a tee-hee-hee moment as she got kind of had up by the producer. But you were talking about conferences. We're still in English conference season. We've got the SNP conference coming
but we
up.
haven't finished with the Tories yet, surely,
well, we're just
we?
about, no, that's what I'm saying. We're just, the
right.
Tories have, despite the fact that even the right-wing press couldn't be bothered going to the Tory party conference, that the big idea, again, seems to be to leave the ECHR. But this has now been the product of a proper investigation and a report. Therefore, it's a good thing to do. And then the Tories are kind of branding themselves as a kind of sensible right wing. They're a kind of reform that can do their sums properly. They've come out with some sweeping statements on cutting the welfare bill, but the kind of big ticket item seems to be leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, putting us alongside Belarus and Russia. And that whilst they weren't going to kick people out of the Conservative Party for not signing up to this, because obviously there are a range of views there, and people like Robert Buckland and Dominic Grieve and others, and more kind of One Nation Tories, are very against this, but they wouldn't be able to stand as potential future candidates at a general election if they don't sign up to this idea of leaving the ECHR.
And actually, interestingly, somebody put it to Kemi Badenoch that doing that could suspend in cooperation over, criminal law enforcement if Britain did leave the ECHR, and she has accepted that apparently,
which is nuts.
That would be an outcome of it. But the thing is, by the by, I mean, geez, it's like, I think everybody, there's a brilliant headline in the New Statesman, the Tory conference vibes, sad, empty, and haunted by Margaret Thatcher. I don't know if anyone actually saw this. I mean, you're shocked. And the writer, it's a very good piece by Rachel Cunliffe. And it's actually, she's sort of saying that it is utterly shocking. Even though you knew that the conference would be small, she's saying, actually seeing the literal hall half empty is utterly, utterly shocking. Apparently, the Tories are trying to say that this is just one of those things because they were tied to an existing contract for the biggest possible venue, the kind of Manchester Central Convention complex. So, they just gone in past years for what's the biggest place we can get, the Boris years, and they just did, however many years of a contract. So apparently they're saying if they weren't tied to that, they would have booked a more modest conference centre and it wouldn't have been so obvious that the gathering was smaller. Titter ye not, because, the SNP have done
I
that
was just
in their
about
time.
to say that Aberdeen Teca, which is an enormous cavernous place, it is a kind of warning for the future. Ghost of Christmas is yet to come, potentially for the SNP if they lose the traction of their supporters and of the people of the party. And the party members, I think, have been ill-used over the last sort of 8 years or so. And certainly the last conference, I can't come to this one at the weekend, unfortunately, because we were already due to be away before everything was set in terms of dates.
Yeah, right.
Honest Gov. We're doing a Jacob Rees-Mogg. He said he couldn't be bothered going to Tory conference. The only time I'd reference myself in connection to the great Mogg.
And indeed, while we've got the Mogg on the brain here, did I make a mistake? It was Jacob Rees-Mogg who took all this money to Ireland, not Nigel Farage.
Yes,
so apologies, right. Nigel. I'm sure you've put your money somewhere infinitely safer, like Brussels. But anyway,
well, that's
on
fine.
You go.
That'll
yes.
save us getting sued by Farage. Yeah, I mean, they quite often do some jiggery-pokery with curtains and moving the seating around to have an enormous space at Teca that only has, half the number of seats in it that it should do. And when you go down, you really go down. If I think it looks likely that the SNP will form the next government in Scotland 2026, they're doing better in the polls, thank goodness, but only comparatively, because the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are so down, and we're going to potentially see a very fractured Parliament in 2026. If that electoral cycle doesn't go well, 26 to the next one, 31, you can very quickly lose power and lose a huge amount of momentum, as the Conservatives are finding, and nobody is remotely interested in what Kemi Badenoch has to say at the moment and what the Conservatives have to say, because they don't see them as any kind of electoral force. Nobody is remotely ready to forgive them for the past 18 years, regardless of how poor the current Labour government is. Now I'm talking about people in England, of course, rather than here. And they're a bit of a kind of non-entity.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come on to the SNP in a minute, but I still think that was a gobsmacking moment where you got, I'm not even calling Sir Mel Stride. I mean, it just what? But anyway, Mel Stride kind of come on to make his speech. And it's the same sort of, if you just kept the close-up on him, it's the same sort of nonsense that we had to tolerate for all the kind of, Boris Johnson years, where people talk with utter vacuity. They're not actually really even making grammatical sentences or whatever. They're just Raj, the Raj posh boy, sort of even sometimes not posh boy, but just Tory acceptees. And then the camera pans out and there's nobody there. And suddenly it's the biggest kind of Emperor's Clothes moment, or else that moment where the curtain is swept back in The Wizard of Oz and there's just a wee guy with a kind of big megaphone. That's what they always were. It's almost like you're really seeing what level of kind of connection their stuff has at the moment. And okay, absolutely, it's because there's more venal people out to the right, but also more cogent people out to the left. Because I mean, much as it is, again, the BBC is not very fond of reporting it, the swing is greater towards the Lib Dems and the Greens than it is towards reform from Labour voters. But that doesn't seem to kind of be sexy enough, so we never hear that end of it. Still, this business, I don't know if you saw this, because it was completely jaw-dropping, that because it's 100 years since Margaret Thatcher's birth, there is a Thatcher Theatre in the Tory conference, which has got mannequins of Thatcher's favourite outfits. Did you not see that?
I've managed to avoid. I did, dear listener, read Conservative Home just for you. You know, the things that we have to do just so that we can talk about this nonsense. To read Robert Buckland arguing very stridently against leaving the ECHR, but no, I didn't see the Thatcher costume.
Well, it was just
Display.
bizarre.
I thought you were going to say she'd be canonised now that she was 100 years.
Well, you know, there could be that next. But you know, it is the weirdest thing because a lot of her most famous outfits involve headscarves. I just kind of think there's a strange kind of thing going on in your head where you think there's probably some sort of kind of, you know, proto-feminist point to be made about a woman with a headscarf being, you know, elevated to the central display of an entire conference. But when it's Margaret Thatcher, I'm afraid all bets are off. And really, there was people trying to say they were being interviewed about which was their most favourite outfit of the ones in these glass cases. And even there was leaks about the numbers of people who turned up just to see the Margaret Thatcher outfits.
The strange Tory fetishists.
It is, you know, utterly weird. So God love them. But at the moment, Robert Jenrick is addressing the conference. In fact, he may just have stopped. But this is now Robert Jenrick is the kind of Andy Burnham of the Conservative Party, because quite obviously Kemi Badenoch is kind of toast. She's polling so badly. I think half of the Conservative members that they polled thought that she wouldn't be there by the next election, and was it 2/3 of them wanted either a pact with Reform or a merger or something like that. So it's pretty bad for her. And of course, Robert Jenrick is sort of bouncing around, apparently not making quite the points that, you know, he's not making quite the obvious points Andy Burnham did about wanting to succeed Kemi Badenoch, because his minders are saying they saw what that did for Andy Burnham.
Very well.
You know, it just went off too quickly. But there's pictures of him already. I mean, it's difficult to do this and read all this at the same time. But there's a picture of him holding a judge's wig. I mean, honestly, it's ridiculous. But he's really got it in for some of the kind of who he thinks are the allies of Keir Starmer. One of whom he's talking about dozens of judges who are biased in favour of migrants. And as he says this, he whips out a judge's wig, you know, to massive applause. Can't see here quite how many people were in the hall for this, but presumably more than, you know, everyone else so far. And he's got plans to try to remove useful idiots, which is what he calls the current Attorney General, who is a useful idiot for our enemies. It's kind of hard to see how you end up just wheaking out some judges and not others. He wants to scrap the Sentencing Council, which, you know, has got lots of people, including Tories, arguing about that. It's an independent council, but probably won't set the heather alight. You know, if you're already tilting towards reform, the Sentencing Council, it's hard to see how that one works. But still, he probably will end up having been the highlight of the whole thing, despite the fact that actually he's in the news this morning for saying parts of Birmingham, he didn't see a white person when he went there to make a
Yeah, I was just
film.
about to say that. He was apparently at a walk around and said he didn't see another white face in the 90 minutes that he was there.
Well, it's also bizarre because he was actually filming a video about litter.
He really should be in the Liberal Democrats. It's kind of like, you not find me a mattress to stand next to, you know. It's that
but anyway,
kind of...
he was filming. He was there filming a video about litter, and basically, you know, had sort of the point he was trying to make was that the place was really the worst integrated place he'd ever been to, and in that context, he said he hadn't seen another white face in the hour and a half he was in there filming. So, of course, that's kicked off everybody. He's been asked if he regretted it. He's saying, not at all, I won't shy away from these issues because, an unintegrated society is a very dangerous one. The thing is, you know, what efforts do any of these guys make to foster any sense of integration? And coming back to what's going on, I mean, there was an accord made between the Jewish and Muslim leaders called the Drumlanrig Accord, which, because of its name, I keep thinking has got a Scottish connection, but it would seem not, where people were working pretty hard, and actually it happened very strongly in Scotland, those sorts of cross-community connections. But those need to get the publicity of someone standing on a stage and valorizing them. And that's what you would do to be helping to knit together a society. Every time you say the opposite, you make people frightened, they pull back into where they feel safe, and the battle lines come up. So God love them. When will this be over anyway, the Tory conference? Is this? Oh no, she's on tomorrow herself.
Yeah.
Kemi
And
Badenoch. So
poor Mel apparently had the graveyard shift because it was Monday and nobody had quite got there yet. That was just kicking off. So you have to take that with a pinch of salt, allegedly. And I think it comes to a crescendo tomorrow.
although I've got to say, coming back to the SNP, I mean, I'm going up on Saturday because that's the big independence debate with all the different amendments put into it, which will be an interesting one to see. So I imagine there'll be quite a lot of people for that. Without wishing to be uncharitable to anyone involved in the agenda on Sunday, it kind of looks, because I find myself, I'm very often the only member of the press sitting and listening to the debates. Everybody else in the press generally is focused on leaders' speeches. It's personalities making speeches and lines that they can get from them. So I'm tending to look like, the old school kind of whatever I am for the interesting debates, and there are a few. But Monday I'll be there again. I'm not sure if I'll be there on Sunday because it's when you're not paid to be a delegate or anything, it's kind of expensive to hang about. So I'll see folk by the by, doubtless, and we'll see how many people turn up.
Yes, I mean I think there'd be hopefully something to say after the weekend. I wish everybody with the rebel clauses well, and it'd be interesting to see whether they actually get any kind of airing, because lots of these things have been very carefully managed beforehand or been designed to be done in such a way so stultifyingly boring that you've kind of forgotten why you were in there in the first place.
No, I mean they are there as straight up,
well, they are, but I mean, they can be talked out or they can be sneered at until they go away.
Well, okay. But I mean, the last time I was listening to, this, and the thing again is we're all dancing on the head of pins here because we've been through this before, the different, minutely different approaches to independence. I seem to remember that in a Hamza-led conference with a long debate that now I can't even remember what the outcome was. But still, I guess the point still is, where are we with the independence campaign? And in that respect, there was a tie-up between Believe in Scotland and the SNP announced over the weekend.
A memorandum of understanding signed between Believe in Scotland and the SNP to share research and to collaborate in their campaigning, which is interesting. And we're getting slightly kind of mixed messages. I think I'm correct in saying that Nicola Sturgeon said that she didn't want to see a reformed Yes Scotland, and that the SNP would take forward the kind of bulk of campaigning any future independence referendum in the sort of 16, 17, 18 period. We've obviously seen recently John Swinney coming out very defiantly for an SNP independence push and tying that into the 2026 election, and the papers which say that only an SNP majority or only a majority for a independence supporting party is the trigger for the Section 30 powers. Some people have complaints about Believe in Scotland. I think it's a bit like any campaign organisation that many people think that there are things which they could do which could be better. But Believe in Scotland has kept on going where others have fallen by the wayside. And for all the detractors and for the concerns that some people might legitimately have about it, it's still there. But I suppose it is the kind of two vanilla arms of the independence movement coming together.
And I wonder, Grant, I just wonder when we get to an election how, because the Yes groups are very much part of Believe in Scotland, and the Yes groups have been quite a sanctuary for folk who want to get away from party political, if you like, rivalry. So the Greens and Alba are part of Yes groups, and yet there's now a tie-up in the umbrella end of the yes groups, most of them with Believe in Scotland, with the SNP particularly. So I just wonder how that works. I mean, clearly it wouldn't have got to the stage of making that agreement because Believe in Scotland has got a kind of steering committee, which is mostly made up, I think, of the yes group's representatives. So we wouldn't have got that far unless it had been supported by the membership. And I guess, looking at a lot of the comments about it, the one thing that just got the big thumbs up in the national coverage of it was just to see people working together. It's just that word, together. And I appreciate there can be lots of problems in that togetherness, but people are so fed up now with kind of, fractions and fracturing and arguments. We'd have to say, just while we're at it, that Alba, I don't know if this has progressed since I read it, but Alba are not having their troubles to seek because it looks as if there's a technical problem. You might know more about this, in that Chris McKelleney, who was their general secretary, was expelled, I think, from Alba. But his say-so is needed to be able to okay candidates. And somehow he hasn't signed the piece of paper necessary to say, you're fine, I'm not in anymore, so I relinquish, my title and everything that goes with it. And then there's a rammy about whether he's just be playing silly buggers, basically, or whether they have failed to send him the right piece of paper. All of which is incredible, but would suggest, that unless they resolve this somehow, they could have a difficulty with some of the candidates like Kenny McCaskill. I find this impossible to believe that this can possibly have got this bad. But
it did. Well, I mean, I think that the main problem here is that the Electoral Commission are saying that the current incumbent as the nominating officer, which is the technical term, has to relinquish their position and can't be removed. And then that's apparently how the law is structured, which seems a bit mad. I mean, if you had a treasurer or something at the golf club and everybody fell out with them, you'd go to the bank and say, look, we've had a resolution at the AGM and, Jim's gone nuts and he keeps ordering the wrong type of peanuts and we're sick of it. So, take him off the bank books. And there'd be a mechanism for doing that. So it seemed very odd that the Electoral Commission are saying that it's incumbent on the person who has the authority to give it up and that there's no legal mechanism to get them to stop. Very strange. So hopefully that'll get sorted out. But, very bizarre. And kind of small beer stuff. I mean, we think we've got small beer stuff. I see one of the candidates for the Irish presidency has had to drop out over a failure to either repay a deposit or an overpayment of rent of the princely sum of £3,000, which is obviously, or €3,000, which is a lot of money, but not exactly international politic level of reasons to give up your candidacy. So when we think our scandals are kind of small beer, we're not the only ones.
Yeah, and of course, let's shed a crocodile tear for poor Michelle Mone.
Well, I was going to say, you've spoilt my link. I was going to say from Tory women who wear headscarves to one who wouldn't. Poor Michelle's feeling victimised.
Yeah, because she was her firm, her man's firm, basically are being made to repay £122 million for COVID supplies that didn't, essentially surgical gowns that either weren't delivered or didn't work. She and he are both sort of, deep, darkly suggesting that the state, this is a kind of, the job's are bad and so on. Everybody, including Kemi Badenoch, has sort of said she should really just give up her seat in the House of Lords. Well, she's then saying she doesn't really feel that she wants to go back there anyway. But I mean, it's just extraordinary. And actually, there's a couple of MPs who are now calling for all the assets linked to Michelle Mone to be frozen so that she can't continue to benefit from assets she bought with the profits of the COVID contracts. Apparently, there's a house in West London, which is sort of, which got bought just in the wake of this. So I don't know if this will go on and on. It's funny because actually she was so much a target for lots of people when there was the kind of constant coverage of the motorhome, Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Murrell, etc., and no coverage of Michelle Mohan and these kind of quite flagrant breaches that were already being investigated. And then she's been in the news, she's in the news for a couple of days, and that's it. It's almost like she was so patently not House of Lords material, but then essentially nobody is House of Lords material in that, just electing your cronies and rewarding them for whatever bungs they've given to a political party. You could conclude that this is evidence of that system going awry. But of course, nobody will conclude that, because even though Labour will, beat its breast about the House of Lords, it won't do anything, not only not to abolish it, but it won't stop adding new members.
Yeah, I don't think we're certainly not going to see Gordon Brown's Senate of the Nation and Regions, which thankfully anytime soon. And for all of their tall talk, the Labour Party has really no great desire to reform the House of Lords, other than to stuff it full of their own new members in order to correct the political balance when they're the majority government.
And just while we're talking of kind of, the whole independence thing, to say I will be interviewing Sarah Salyers about the efforts being made in Europe to recognise Scotland as a colonised nation and where that's going. We also hope to speak to Craig Murray, who's over in New York doing something similar with the group Liberation. Anyway, it's trying to get them, he's obviously time difference-wise in a different space, but hopefully we'll have some clips from that in next week's podcast. There is actually quite a lot of other things happening, I suddenly realise.
Yes, we started with the weather, and of course the James Robertson's great poem, the news where you are, ends with the weather where you are, which is more extreme than the weather where we are. So tough shit. He's doing a gig on Thursday, October the 30th, with the Dundee and Angus Independence Group. And I think you've got a showing of the Highland Windfarm.
Yes, we'll put all these links up if you want to come. But I did tweet this. This will cheer you up. God Almighty, there's little enough to cheer you up at the moment. But especially for folk lucky enough to be living in the vicinity of Dundee, there's a night for you that will be a zinger with James Robertson. What else is happening? Well, actually, in chronological order, I think. I'm going to speak at the rally, the All Under One Banner Cymru rally in Rhyl in North Wales on the 18th of October. Not really expected to see many listeners there, but you would be amazed, actually. I've ended up I can remember being in Barcelona on a debate supporting the Catalans and made a wee mention that I was there and slightly to loose end, and had the most incredible evening with a young woman who showed me around, the non-tourist end of Barcelona, which was fantastic. So if anybody's about Rhyl, and wants to say hello, do get in touch. The guys in Carnarvon are showing the Denmark film, the following lunchtime, I think 2:00 or something, on the 19th. So again, if you're in the Carnarvon area, come to that. And I've got to say, this has been an incredible thing to just be communicating with people in North Wales, because I went to the journalism course in Cardiff 1,000 years ago. And quite obviously, I can remember there's a great line in Mike Scott's The Waterboys, one of his songs, where he talks about the different nations. And he has that phrase where he describes Wales as two hands held apart. And in many ways, that is true of Wales, that it's so different north and south. But I haven't really been in the north so much. Now, these are all the people I've been in touch with, their names, and every single one of them is a Welsh name. If you got to the stage of just there being one or two, you think, well, that's par for the course. We've got our own Seamuses and so on. But I've been communicating with, and I'm going to try and say the Welsh pronunciation, Ifan, Dowie, Annual, Heth, which is spelt head with two Ds, but that double D, like the Seneth, becomes a th sound at the end. And that name actually means peace. There's a good name for you. Nia, which is basically short for Neve in other languages, which means brightness. And Owain, which is Owen, And it really brought it home to me, this thing about the cultural distinctiveness of Wales and how matter-of-factly everyone is essentially using Welsh for naming for their lives. So I'll be really fascinated to, hear as much from all of them as anything to do with the Denmark film and see how that goes down with a totally different non-Scottish audience.
Excellent. And the Highland Windfarm Revolt is screening in Beaulieu on the 29th. So we'll get all of those.
Of November.
Yes,
I know these guys are working well ahead. And just to say as well, there's a film that I made with some guys. There'll be a piece in the Herald about it in the middle of next week, actually. The massive efforts made by the Loch Garry Tree Group to try to save a glen that is basically a barren wilderness, where sheep, deer, overgrazing for centuries has just removed all trees from the landscape and has thus basically screwed up the fish in the loch, because you need tree litter to feed the wee bugs that then get eaten by the fish. So Ron Greer, who is some force of nature, is Ron. He's got a very special birthday coming up this week, so happy birthday to you, my dear. But he doggedly, way back 50 years ago, he went back into that glen when he was employed at the Pitlochry Fish Lab, and he was measuring the kind of trout and the particularly Arctic char in the loch and discovering how stunted they were. He decided to do something about it himself, hitchhiked 16 miles up from Blair Athol in 1974 to basically start planting saplings and, crucially, fence them off from the tiny teeth. And the efforts he started then sort of blossomed with 130 people being in this tree group at one point, all doing the same thing, and using a sequencing approach to planting, because the repeated assault on the soil, if you like, had left it so depleted. So he planted saplings through lupins and Scotch broom, which is where I came in, because I kind of like lupins, a bit frothy that way. But that really worked. And he ended up with Derek Pretzwell. The two of them basically managed to create a beautiful mixed woodland with wild strawberries, dragonflies, just like a little oasis, basically, in the middle of what you would think was just a series of golf bunkers. It was so arid looking, the soil, which makes the point that, the land is capable. We seem to be incapable of enforcing what's necessary to let the land get back to what it would be, and it would be a forest. So anyway, that film, we all plugged out in July to go and see what had happened to the wee forest since then. And it's a hell of a walk along the side of Loch Garry, I'll tell you, which very probably didn't help the old Achilles problem, but still, that's by the by. So the film is premiering, as we will Americanly say, at the Revive Conference in Perth on November the 8th. So it's on at lunchtime. There's a Q&A with it, with myself and Ron. So if you're coming to Revive, we'll see you then. And it'll be online for everybody else that evening. And the Finland Film is working its way into cinemas and so on. God, it's film. And it's funny because they were all made at different times, but they're all coming home to roost about the same time.
Sounds good. Louping lupins, as my grandpa would have called them. He was against lupins. I can't really remember why.
Honestly, there are so many people against lupin. I mean, what Ron did, Ron called himself the Lupin Patrol at one point, which was one of my favourite Monty Python sketches that probably also helped. But what was happening was the A9 was being expanded in places, so it was getting little bits of dual carriageway. And a lot of land was then, there was new sort of slopes and whatever. And because there was nothing binding the slopes together, they were just starting to erode, and, there was nothing growing or anything. So Ron took packets of Arctic lupin seeds and went and sort of spring. If you go past Dalnaspidal on the A9 at a certain time of year, you will always see lupins. And I think that is Ron. It would have to be said SNH were not impressed, because the Arctic lupin is apparently not a native plant. So I suspect there was a little bit of pulling out lupins as much as they were being put in. But Ron is not a boy to be, deterred by the great and the good, you'd have to say.
Quite right too, and happy big birthday to him. And on that note, we'll get all of those details up in the show notes, and we'll see you next week, chums.